Hello everyone, welcome to the Good Food Institute's webinar on plant-based dairy. My name is Siddharth Bhide. I'm the Science and Technology Specialist at the Good Food Institute India and a food scientist by training. Today, I'm going to talk about various aspects that one needs to understand from a business and technical perspective while developing plant-based dairy products. So let me start sharing my screen here. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the work and support of my co-authors on this webinar, Miranda Grizio and MJ Kinney. This webinar will be useful to a variety of stakeholders, to businesses and entrepreneurs who are involved or looking to get involved in the plant-based dairy market, to technical specialists such as researchers, food scientists, and engineers who would like more scientific information on plant-based dairy, which will help formulate and scale up plant-based dairy products, to investors who would like to understand where the market is at for plant-based dairy and the projections, to students who wish to learn more about this segment and pursue research in this segment, and to consumers who are interested in plant-based dairy. The agenda for the webinar today will be, I'll be introducing the Good Food Institute and why we do what we do, the need for plant-based dairy, its market around the globe, and market growth over the years. Talking about traditional animal milk, which we'll be referring to as conventional milk in this presentation, its functionality, nutrition, processing methods, etc. This will then serve as a basis to then explore plant-based dairy products. We'll then be doing a deep dive on plant-based dairy, focusing on plant-based milk, talking about the sources of plant-based milk, process flow to create plant-based milk, and regulations around plant-based milk and dairy products. We'll then be deconstructing few plant-based dairy products out in the market and understanding them from a product development perspective. We'll then discuss hybrid plant-based and cellular agriculture dairy products. We'll end with discussing specific white space opportunities from technical and business perspective in the plant-based dairy segment across various geographies around the globe. The Good Food Institute is an international network of nonprofits focused on accelerating the shift towards a better food system. The three areas we work to accelerate are plant-based, cultivated, and fermentation-based meat and dairy products, collectively known as the alternative protein products. The Good Food Institute has teams across the globe in India, in the United States, Europe, Asia Pacific, Brazil, and Israel. We work across three domains. Our science and technology work focuses on advancing science, that is, analytical research, scientific funding, and growing the scientific community around alternative protein products. Our corporate engagement work includes supporting entrepreneurs and startups in this area, as well as helping large food companies capitalize on and prepare for the advancement of these exciting categories of food. Our policy work is centered on achieving fair regulation of these products and helping governments identify high impact opportunities to support the sector through funding. The Good Food Institute's guiding principle, or the North Star as we call it, is to harness the power of food innovation and markets to accelerate plant-based, cultivated, and fermentation-based meat and dairy to create a sustainable, healthy, and just food system. The North Star is our mission, and by accomplishing our mission, we help solve four major issues below the surface. By consuming alternative protein products, we, first, improve human health by reducing the risk of antibiotic resistance, pathogens, and nutritional diseases like cardiovascular disease, all of which can be caused by consumption of animal-based products. We reduce environmental degradation, as alternative protein products have low greenhouse gas emissions, lower land use, and use less freshwater resources. We reduce global poverty, as animal agriculture that is feeding crops, including corn and soy, to animals instead of directly to people is inefficient, which we'll be learning in the coming slides. This reduces the availability of these crops for human consumption and thus drives up the prices. And lastly, promote animal welfare. As we all know, due to animal products, animal lives are cut short, and in addition, industrial animal agriculture often relies on cruel confinement systems that are distressing to animals. We work with a variety of stakeholders to find a better way to feed an estimated 10 billion people by 2050. Animal agriculture is not a sustainable means of feeding the growing population as it is highly inefficient. The ratio of calories out to calories in is drastically low, as most of the calories, as you would expect, are used up by the animal for activities needed for its survival, like breathing, walking around, digestion, etc., instead of conversion into muscle, which can then be used as meat for humans. We have already pushed animals to their biological limits, and even post that, the most efficient animal, which is chicken, just gives 1 calorie of output as meat for 9 calories of input it takes in as feed in the form of soy corn. Because of the need to feed animals in order to get foods like meat and dairy from them, the industry is under tremendous pressure to utilize vast tracts of the world's land for livestock. 77% of agricultural land is used to grow crops like soy and corn, which are used to feed animals so that they can feed us. This, coupled with extremely low calorie out to calorie in ratio, is a highly inefficient way of getting food. With the increasing population, the demand for food is increasing, and to keep up with this demand, forests and shrublands, including in places like the Amazon and Indonesia, are being razed down to plant crops like soy and corn to feed animals, which can then feed humans, which is having a tremendous environmental impact, as we all know. Now that we understand the benefits of moving to alternative protein products, in today's webinar, we'll be focusing on one of the solutions, which is plant-based dairy, as an alternative to conventional animal dairy, and how it can be used to benefit human and environmental health. Even within plant-based dairy, we'll be focusing on plant-based milk, as it is the most popular plant-based dairy product and also forms the base to creating other plant-based dairy products. Before we go into the details of how plant-based dairy is made, ingredients, processing, regulations, market sizing, etc., a key point which I would like to highlight is that consumers make their purchases primarily based on three things: taste, price, and convenience. These three aspects form the key to any product or product category success. So it's imperative we need to make plant-based dairy products that taste similar or better, price similar or lower, and make them have the same convenience and accessibility as traditional animal-based products. So please keep this in your mind space as we walk through all the other slides. Let's start off with the global and regional market for plant-based dairy with a focus on plant-based milk and understand why it is a good time to be in this segment. As seen in the graph on the screen, the global market for plant-based milk is growing, and in 2018, the global retail sales of plant-based milk totaled $17.4 billion. The 10-year compound annual growth rate was a positive 10%. This represents a growing market with a lot of potential. By volume, plant-based milk now makes up 7% of the global milk market. Of the global plant-based milk market, Asia Pacific has the largest share at 66%, followed by North America at 16% and Western Europe at 11%. Since this chart talks about the cumulative global plant-based milk sales, it is important to point out that traditionally, sales of plant-based milks were made of soy milk, but in 2012, non-soy beverages overtook soy for the majority share of the plant-based milk market. Such alternatives include milk made from sources like almonds, cashews, coconuts, hazelnuts, hemp, oats, rice, and walnuts. Now let's talk about the plant-based milk opportunity in different regions, and let's begin with the Asia Pacific region as it had the largest share of plant-based milks. In 2018, sales of plant-based milks in the Asia Pacific region totaled $11.1 billion. The region's top plant-based milk consuming countries rank among the global leaders in per capita consumption and are supported by high regional rates of lactose intolerance and price parity compared to traditional animal-based milk. China leads in plant-based milk with 73% of plant-based milk sales by value and 71% by volume, followed by Japan and Thailand. Focusing on China a little, China's long history of soy milk as a staple in the diet allowed China to become a leader in the plant-based dairy early on, both regionally and globally. However, demand has waned as consumer preferences have shifted in the recent years. Since 2013, per capita volume has declined by a cumulative 20% and offset growth from elsewhere in the region. What's positive is that China's volume contraction moderated in 2018, and we anticipate further improvement as companies including Want, Vitasoy, and Danone come out with more innovations in the plant-based segment. Moving to Western Europe, the regional plant-based milk market remains robust. Over the past 5 years, per capita volume has grown at a compound annual growth rate of a positive 10.5%. Per capita consumption levels vary widely, from a high of 7.4 liters in Spain, the region's share leader, 24% by value and 32% by volume, to just 1.4 liters in Italy. Like China, Spain had a head start in the plant-based milks compared to other countries in the region. This is due to the country's long use of horchata, which is a traditional plant-based drink dating back to the 13th century, made from tiger nuts. Horchata remains an important part of Spain's culture, although plant-based milks made from soy and other crops are equally or more popular now. Horchata makes up 15% of the plant-based milk market. Spain's culturally entrenched horchata and China's long history of soy milk points to the fact that plant-based milks have been culturally entrenched for a long time in a few countries, leading to widespread acceptance and usage. Spain's leading position in the plant-based milk segment is also because Spain has one of the highest levels of dairy intolerance in Europe, and thus consumers prefer plant-based options. The plant-based dairy industry across Europe is growing as a lot of companies are innovating in the segment. In terms of industry, Danone is the market leader. Danone's 28% value share is more than 4 times that of the next largest competitor. Their portfolio is comprised of the mainstream Alpro, Europe's leading brand, and Provamil in the natural channel. Alpro has produced soy milk since the 1980s and was the first to launch non-soy milk alternatives. Moving on to Latin America, in 2018, sales of plant-based milk totaled $670 million, but still comprised of only a small 2.2% volume share of Latin America's total milk market, and that is why we see ample room for growth. Brazil was initially the leader in plant-based milk market, but over the last few years, the Brazilian market has been pressurized by economic weakness, increasing concerns about transgenic and GMO soybeans, short shelf life, and the fragmented supply chain. In 2018, Mexico surpassed Brazil to become the largest Latin American plant-based milk market. Mexico's annual plant-based milk sales stand at $200 million and make up regional shares of 30% in value and volume. In terms of industry, Coca-Cola is Latin America's plant-based milk leader with $310 million in revenue, following the 2017 deal for Aedes. Founded in 1988 in Argentina, the Aedes brand holds a commanding 46% value share of Latin America's plant-based milk market and more than 5 times the largest branded competitor, which is Danone's Silk at 7.3%. Aedes' primary markets include Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina. Other MNCs like Danone, Nestlé, General Mills are also making strategic investments in plant-based dairy companies to increase their presence across Latin America. Even in the United States, value share of plant-based milk is over 13% and volume share is over 8% of the total US milk market and is growing every year. This shows there is a tremendous opportunity to grow further, increasing the volume share and at the same time bettering the economics of scale. Here is an interesting graph which looks at plant-based milk sales by product type in the US. Almond milk, as you can see, is the category leader with $1.3 billion in sales and continues to increase. Oat milk reached $84 million in sales and is the fastest growing plant-based milk. Dollar sales of oat milk grew 686% in the past year and 1,946% over the past 2 years. Oat milk's popularity is soaring as coffee shops learn about the excellent foaming properties of oat milk, which allows baristas to make high-quality plant-based cappuccinos and other coffeehouse beverages. Consumers who use oat milk as a beverage also appreciate oat milk's thicker, creamier texture compared to other popular plant-based milks. Pea milk has experienced a recent resurgence and is experiencing high growth. The other category of milk which are coming up include hemp, flax, walnuts, amongst others. So now that we know that plant-based milk is gaining traction around the globe, let's understand the consumers and their mindset when they are buying plant-based milk and dairy products. According to a report published by Wells Fargo Securities on plant-based foods, in the countries that lead in the plant-based milk purchases, most households that buy plant-based milk are also buying conventional milk. In the US, it is 88% of the households, and in Brazil, The number is 96%. So we are talking about a mainstream phenomenon here where plant-based milks are no longer confined to vegan households. Factors that could be driving this trend include perceptions that plant-derived products offer superior health benefits, offer comparatively cleaner labels, and the perception of negative environmental impacts of traditional animal milk production. In another study conducted by Fonalytics that investigated which plant-based products were the most popular amongst omnivores in the United States, plant-based milk came out on top, with 51% of omnivores purchasing it at least some of the time. The next most popular categories for omnivores were burgers at 34% and other dairy at 32%, which doesn't include cheese, which is listed as a separate category, but does include products like plant-based creamers and yogurts. When it came to vegetarian or vegan population, burgers came out at the top category with 67% of vegetarians or vegans purchasing them at least some of the time, followed by milk and tofu. An interesting point to note here is that omnivore population, as seen in the study and around the globe, is significantly higher than the vegetarian and vegan population. Hence, alternative protein products opportunity is much higher with omnivores and flexitarians. Even Impossible Foods reported that 9 out of 10 people who eat their products are regular animal meat eaters. So the two key conclusions for this segment on plant-based dairy market. One, there is a huge market and a growing market across geographies. And two, alternative protein products, including plant-based milk and dairy, are no longer a niche trend and the market is being driven by omnivores and flexitarians. Now let's move on to the technical segment of the presentation. Before we look at plant-based milk, let's first review some information on traditional animal milk or conventional milk as we call it. We can use this information as a basis for constructing plant-based milk. Starting with the definition, a product must meet certain requirements to be labeled as milk, and these requirements can vary from country to country. In the United States, the legal definition of milk is defined in the Code of Federal Regulations, as you can see on the screen. Essentially, the requirements specify that it must be sourced from cows. If packaged, it must have been pasteurized. There are minimum requirements for the amount of solids and milk fat. The regulation also states that it is acceptable to adjust the components of milk to the desired specification by separation or by addition of other milk components. Moving on to the nutrient aspect of conventional milk, milk has a number of nutrients, including soluble components such as sugars and oligosaccharides, for example lactose, which are chains of sugars, as well as proteins and minerals such as calcium. The main types of proteins found in milk are the casein proteins at about 80% and the whey proteins at about 20%. Milk is very nutritious as it basically is a nutrient delivery system from the mother cow to her calf that provides the right mix of essential nutrients for the calf to grow and thrive. Milk also plays an important role in development of the calf's immune system. The exact composition and nutrient makeup of raw milk will depend upon a number of factors, including the species of the animal, the age of the animal's diet, and so forth. The components of milk not only provide nutrition, but they also provide functional properties to milk. For example, the fat in milk does more than just provide an essential nutrient. It also imparts a creamy texture and a rich dairy flavor to the milk. Carbohydrates contribute to milk's texture and also impart a slightly sweet taste. Proteins are widely known as the most functional of all nutrients. Protein provide various functional properties to milk like emulsification, gelation, etc. Milk protein's ability to emulsify helps to keep fat droplets suspended in the aqueous phase rather than separating out, particularly after milk has been homogenized. The proteins in milk also have the ability to form a gel or to coagulate under certain conditions, which is essential for producing certain types of dairy products such as gel dairy desserts, yogurts, cheese, etc. For the vitamins and minerals present in milk, the most important function is the nutrition they provide. Here we take a closer look at the nutrition of different types of processed milk: whole milk, low-fat milk, and fat-free milk sold in the United States. These are different types of processed packaged milks that have been adjusted to meet the milk fat standard associated with that type of milk. The first label, to the left, shows the nutrition content of 1 cup of whole milk, which contains about 3.25% milk fat. You can see that the calcium level is high at 25% of the daily value, and it contains 8 grams of protein. However, the fat and calories are also high. The next label is for low-fat milk, standardized to 1% milk fat, which is a popular low-calorie type of milk. There is also a 2% version, which is called reduced fat milk, that falls between whole milk and low-fat milk in calories. In the US, low-fat milk is the more common choice due to its lower fat and calorie content, and you'll see that plant-based milks are typically formulated to be more similar to low-fat milk. The last nutrition label shows fat-free milk, also called non-fat or skim milk, which contains no more than 0.2% milk fat, which rounds down to 0 on the nutrition label. You can see that fat-free milk still retains its protein and calcium levels. Since the fortification of milk is common, these labels all represent milks that have been fortified with vitamin D, which is a common practice to improve calcium absorption. Continuing on the nutrition front, this slide shows the comparison of quality of proteins present in conventional milk with those present in plants, and is an important point to consider when formulating plant-based dairy products. The protein found in milk is of high quality with the right balance of amino acids for the body. The two standard measures of protein quality are the PDCAS, which is an acronym for Protein Digestibility Corrected Amino Acid Score, and the newer method called the DIAS, which is an acronym for Digestible Indispensable Amino Acid Score. The newer DIAS method is believed to be more accurate than PDCAS and is expected to ultimately replace PDCAS after data on enough proteins has been gathered. I would recommend everyone listening to this webinar to go through these methods at your own time, but the big idea is that both these methods compare the ratio of essential amino acids in a food to the essential amino acids required by a human body and their digestibility. A value of 1 or higher indicates that all the essential amino acids are present in food and that all of the protein in that food product is available for use by the human body. As you can see, milk protein concentrate scores a value of 1.18 on DAS and a score of 1 on PDCAS, indicating that it is a high quality protein source. Whey protein isolate, which is also derived from milk, also scores a 1 or higher. Soy protein isolate, which has a DAS score of 0.91 and a PDCAS score of 1, indicates it is a high quality protein source too. Pea protein concentrate scores somewhat lower, a 0.82 on DAS and a 0.89 on PDCAS. The proteins found in grains are typically much lower in DAS and PDCAS scores. For example, rice protein concentrate scores only a 0.37 on DAS and a 0.42 on the PDCAS. This indicates a rather low quality protein, which can mean lack of certain essential amino acids and/or low digestibility of the amino acids. For rice protein, the amino acid lysine is in short supply and is referred to as the limiting amino acid. Protein quality is an important factor to consider when formulating plant-based dairy products and becomes especially important for certain types of products like infant formula and sports nutrition products for athletes. A typical trick used by food scientists is to use plant proteins in combinations which complement each other's amino acid profiles and give a high protein quality score. Coming to the molecular structure of milk, milk is an oil and water emulsion with the fat globules dispersed in aqueous phase of milk. The proteins in milk are either dispersed in aqueous phase or are at the oil-water interface. There are two types of proteins in milk, whey proteins and casein proteins. Usually, casein proteins form what are known as casein micelles, which adhere themselves to the oil-water interface, act as emulsifiers in addition to lending a lot of functional properties to milk. Let's look at the structure in more detail now. The fat globules in milk, known as native milk fat globules, consist of triglycerides at the core, and then there is a complex tri-layer membrane around the core consisting of phospholipids, cholesterol, and proteins including casein micelles, glycoproteins, etc. The hydrophobic core contains nutrients like nonpolar carotenoids and vitamins. An interesting property of milk fat is that it is partially solid to solid at room temperature with a melting point of 37 degrees Celsius, and this melting property of milk fat lends itself to a lot of applications in milk-derived products. For example, a lot of products like butter and cheese are solid under refrigeration and partially solid at room temperature, but melt when heated, which is one of their main functional properties, and this is one of the main challenges that plant-based products are trying to solve for, which is melting. Milk fat's unique melt behavior and softening well at body temperature while retaining a solid texture during refrigeration allows a slow release of flavors in various food products, leading to an enhanced flavor profile. The second thing to look at are the proteins found in milk, and let's focus on caseins, which are in the form of casein micelles. Casein micelles are natural nanoparticles composed of various kinds of flexible proteins and minerals, held together mainly by hydrophobic and electrostatic forces. The biological function of casein micelles is to carry large amounts of insoluble calcium phosphate to mammalian young in liquid form and clot in the stomach for more efficient nutrition. Casein micelles have an interesting structure as they hold a lot of water, much higher in volume than the volume of micelles themselves. They do not aggregate or sediment along with other proteins, and they also coat the fat globules, acting as emulsifiers. A lot of plant-based dairy research is focused on recreating milk structure using plant-based oils and proteins, and one of the methods focuses on recreating the oil-protein water interfacial structure. The hypothesis is that this structure will lead to similar functionality of plant-based dairy products as animal dairy products have, and we'll talk about this in the coming slides. The typical steps involved in processing conventional milk are as below. Raw milk is received from the dairy farm. It is then subjected to a preheating and separation step, usually via centrifugation, to obtain fat component and a fat depleted serum component. These two fractions can then be recombined in various ratios to obtain skim, 1%, 2%, and whole milk, as well as various kinds of cream. The milk is then homogenized to reduce fat droplet size and ensure effective coating of protein molecules to the surface, which prevents creaming over storage. We'll be talking more about homogenization technology in the coming slides. The milk is then pasteurized or heat treated to inactivate the pathogens and reduce the bacterial load so that the milk retains quality and is safe to consume. The heat treatment can vary in temperature time conditions, which leads to the products of varying shelf lives and storage conditions. We'll be touching upon this aspect too in the coming slides. It is then passed through a cooling and packaging step before heading out to the distribution channels. The reason we are talking about this flowchart here is that plant-based milks also have a similar processing flow, and usually milk processing facilities can be used to process plant-based milks, and this is especially important for entrepreneurs who might not have the funding necessary to set up their own manufacturing facilities. Conventional milk has certain specifications when it comes to sensory attributes, nutrition, and applications. And for plant-based milk to be an effective replacer for conventional milk, it needs to hit most, if not all, these parameters. Many consumers have grown up drinking conventional milk and are therefore familiar with its distinctive attributes. It is a low viscosity fluid with an optically opaque, creamy white appearance and characteristic bland flavor profile. It has quite a mild flavor and light color, which means that any off notes or off colors are easily detected by consumers. This is one of the major challenges for many plant-based products that come with a characteristic flavor of pigment, such as almond, coconut, flaxseed, legumes, or oat sauces. As explained earlier, milk also has highly digestible and bioavailable proteins. It is also often fortified with vitamins A and D. A lot of people consume milk for the nutrition it provides. Hence, it may be important to incorporate these nutritional parameters into plant-based milk. People will only switch from consuming conventional milk to plant-based milk if the plant-based milk functions similarly. It is therefore necessary to understand how milk is used in practice. Milk is often had as a cold beverage, but it may also be used in various other ways. For instance, it can be added to coffee, to tea, to other hot drinks. It can be used to prepare oatmeal or breakfast cereal. It can be included in sauces, dressings, or soups, and can also be used to prepare other dairy products like baked goods and desserts. Okay, so let's continue now and move to plant-based milk development. There are four primary sources of making plant-based milk. Legumes like soy and pea. Soy, as we all know, has been used for a long time now for making plant-based milks, and pea is an upcoming source. The legumes are also high in protein, which is an advantage if the formulator decides to use these legumes. 2. Grains. Grains are coming up in a big fashion when it comes to plant-based milk products. As mentioned earlier, oat milk has grown significantly over the last few years due to its excellent foaming properties. Traditionally, rice milk suffered from solubility issues, but over the past few years, significant technological advances have been made which have resulted in seeing rice milks on the shelves. 3. Seeds. Seeds are an interesting source as you can not only use their proteins but also the oil present in them for formulating plant-based milk, leading to better cost economics. 4. Nuts. When it comes to nuts, almonds lead the way, but products are coming up using cashews, peanuts, and coconut as their best ingredient for plant-based dairy products. Also, blends of various crops are being used to complement each other's functionalities and nutrition profiles. Okay, a typical formulation for a plant-based milk consists of different categories of ingredients, and each ingredient plays a specific function in the formulation. The legume, the grain, or the nut source forms the base, which imparts viscosity and mouthfeel, and is also the source for carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. The proteins contribute to the functionality of plant-based milk. The gums and hydrocolloids are also usually used to impart viscosity and a creamy mouthfeel, though they are not generally preferred for a clean label. A lot of research is going on to find cleaner label alternatives to gums or hydrocolloids. Sugars can sometimes be added to increase viscosity and to also give a sometimes preferred slightly sweetish taste while masking the plenty of flavors from the base. Two types of flavors are typically used in plant-based milks. First type are masking flavors to mask the off, beany or planty notes from the plant sources, and the second are flavors that boost the base flavor, example adding almond flavor to almond milk. Vitamins and mineral premixes are added for fortification purposes, and additional phospholipids like lecithin can be added to provide additional emulsification, which prevents separation of different phases over shelf life. There are two standard procedures to make plant-based milk. This slide describes the first approach, where we work directly with the whole legumes, or grains or nuts or seeds. In this approach, the plant's natural oil bodies are kept intact and play an important role in the structure of the product. Going through the processing flowchart, the base ingredient is taken and soaked to soften the plant tissue. It is then subjected to a grinding step to break the plant tissue, followed by a filtration step to remove the fibrous hull material, leaving behind just the proteins, soluble sugars, and oil bodies. These oil bodies consist of a fatty core surrounded by a layer of phospholipids and proteins, and therefore has composition and structure very similar to the milk fat globule. An optional blanching step can be added to inactivate endogenous enzymes in the plant material. At this point, other functional ingredients like flavors, colors, preservatives, thickeners are added depending upon product specifications. The mixture is then subjected to pasteurization to inactivate the spoilage and pathogenic bacteria, followed by a homogenization step to break down fat globules further and allow proteins to absorb to the oil-water interface to form a stable emulsion. It is then followed by a filling and packaging step. Few aspects to consider while formulating plant-based milk include the fact that the sensory attributes of plant-based milks may not necessarily resemble those of the equivalent products formed from conventional milk. This is mainly because of different protein, carbohydrate, fat, and mineral profile found in conventional milk. When it comes to fat, though present in a similar structural format, fats in plant-based milks are different types of fats compared to those in conventional animal-based milk. This gives the plant-based milk a different characteristic mouthfeel and flavor depending upon the plant source. When it comes to proteins, conventional milk has high level of caseins, which exist as fairly disordered flexible chains and lead to the formation of specific type of structures. On the other hand, the proteins in plant-based milks are tightly wrapped into compact globular structures, which form quite different structures when they associate with each other. This is one of the reasons why soy, almond, or coconut yogurts may have a different texture when compared to a conventional yogurt. It can also be a challenge to create plant-based cheese that matches conventional cheese due to similar reasons. Cheese production involves complex biochemical reactions that break down proteins and fats into many different small aroma and taste molecules. And since the types of fats and proteins present in plant-based milks are vastly different, this leads to different aroma and taste molecules in the final product. The second approach is a way of making plant-based milk without the use of whole legumes, or grains or nuts or seeds, and it's based on making an emulsion out of water and a plant-based oil and restructuring fat globules from plant sources to replicating milk fat globules. The logic being, instead of using natural oil bodies present in plants to replace milk fat globules, it is possible to construct artificial fat globules using homogenization technology. When oil and water are homogenized together in the presence of an emulsifier, they can form an oil and water emulsion with many of the characteristics of conventional milk, such as appearance, viscosity, stability, mouthfeel, and flavor. Going through the flowchart now. The three key ingredients at the beginning of the process are water, oil, and emulsifier. A variety of different plant-based oils can be used to construct this kind of emulsion, including coconut, corn, flaxseed, olive, palm, soybean, and sunflower oils. Each of these oils vary in their molecular composition, physicochemical properties, sensory attributes, and nutritional profiles, and thus it is essential to select an oil matching the desired product specifications. When it comes to emulsifiers, various types of plant-based emulsifiers are available to facilitate the formation and stability of oil and water emulsions, including plant-based proteins, phospholipids, and certain polysaccharides. The next important step is recreating fat globules using homogenization technology, which reduces the oil droplet size and ensures that the emulsifier adheres to the oil-water interface, stabilizing the reconstructed fat globules. The next steps are then adding other functional ingredients like flavors, colors, stabilizers, thickeners, followed by thermal processing, followed by packaging and filling operations. Ingredients and processing methods impact the physicochemical characteristics and stability of plant-based milk as they affect the thermodynamic state of the food system, resulting in a change of pH, ionic balance, etc. Let's take pH as an example. A change in ingredients can cause a change in pH, which impacts charge of the system and the associated attractive or repulsive forces between proteins, since proteins are charged molecules. As seen in the graph to the right for pea protein, when the pH of the system is changed and as we approach the isoelectric point of plant proteins, which is between a pH of 4 and 5, the proteins start aggregating and dissociating from the oil-water interface, leading to an unstable emulsion, which is depicted via increase in the size of fat globules. At the same time, the proteins can precipitate out, leading to sedimentation and a gritty mouthfeel. The two unit operations I would like to focus on now in the processing of plant-based milks are homogenization and pasteurization. Homogenization, by definition, is the process of making things uniform or similar. In the case of plant-based milks, it is the process of reducing the fat droplets to the same size. This increases the surface area of fat droplets and ensures emulsifiers coat these fat droplets, ensuring their stability and preventing creaming and flocculation. There are numerous kinds of homogenizers, including high shear mixers, colloid milks, high pressure valve homogenizers, microfluidizers, and sonicators. The most common type of homogenizer is the high pressure valve homogenizer, where liquid is forced through a narrow gap at extremely high pressures, and this causes high shear, a large pressure drop, and cavitation in the liquid, all of which act to homogenize the sample. Sometimes, the high pressure stream is directed at a blade, ring, or plate, upon which the sample collides at a high speed, creating an impact which aids in homogenization. Each kind of homogenizer has its own advantages and disadvantages in terms of costs, maintenance requirements, scale-up potential, production rate, and the ability to produce small droplets with a narrow particle size distribution. And stakeholders need to make the choice depending upon their product requirements and available capital. Plant-based milks in the market are subjected to a pasteurization step to inactivate spoilage and pathogenic bacteria. The shelf life and type of storage, that is ambient or refrigerated or frozen, depends upon the temperature time conditions used for pasteurization. Pasteurization process that is used for plant-based milks is similar to the one used for conventional milk. Going through the different types of pasteurization, a common industry standard in conventional milk is high temperature short time pasteurization, where milk is heated to 161 Fahrenheit for a minimum of 15 seconds. This gives a shelf life of 10 to 21 days when kept refrigerated under 45 Fahrenheit. This type of pasteurization is typically not used in plant-based milks as of now, as the industry is still novel in most geographies and the products being launched in the space are aiming for a longer shelf life. However, you'll find that the high temperature short time plant-based milk products in more local or small scale setups or where plant-based milks have been around for a long time for traditional uses, for example in Asia. Next pasteurization type is called ultra high temperature pasteurization. In this, the milk is heated to 280 Fahrenheit for a minimum of 2 seconds. This gives a shelf life up to 90 days under refrigerated conditions. Lastly, there is aseptic ultra-high temperature pasteurization in which we apply the same temperature time conditions of 280 Fahrenheit for a minimum of 2 seconds, but we make sure that the packaging material is sterilized typically with hydrogen peroxide and the environmental conditions under which filling occurs are also sterile. This leads to the product being shelf stable for 6 months or more. A few points to consider when determining the right type of pasteurization for your product are: what shelf life is needed for your product? If a shorter shelf life is acceptable, then maybe high temperature short time pasteurization is good enough. An advantage of this type of pasteurization is that the temperature time conditions are relatively lower or milder and may have less impact on plant protein stability. 2. Does your product need refrigerated storage or ambient storage? Ambient storage can be beneficial if a temperature controlled supply chain cannot be guaranteed, but aseptic processing is typically much more expensive than the other two pasteurization types. Another interesting point to note is that historically, plant-based milks saw a big spike in their sales as soon as they were moved from a shelf-stable retail space to a refrigerated retail space, that is, when they were placed beside conventional milk. Consumers connected with plant-based milks much better. Another thing to consider is that shelf life is not just about pathogenic bacteria. Shelf life is also from an organoleptic or a sensory standpoint. So even if the product is safe for a given amount of time from a microbial standpoint, but there could be a chance that it might not be acceptable from an organoleptic standpoint much sooner than that. And thus, both organoleptic shelf life and microbial shelf life need to be taken into consideration when determining the shelf life of the product. So now that we know the basics around formulation and processing of plant-based milk, let's take a look at how some plant-based dairy companies are formulating their products. Ripple is one of the premier plant-based milk companies in the United States. Their flagship product, Ripple Milk, is on the screen. There are 14 ingredients, including their patented Riptene pea protein. The nutrition is comparable to conventional milk in the protein content, but Ripple has about half of the fat and sugar. It has fewer calories and more calcium. Let's now look at the functionality of each ingredient. Ripple is using as its base a proprietary pea protein ingredient called Riptene and is often credited with putting yellow pea protein in the spotlight as an alternative legume source to soy for protein-rich plant-based beverages. Concerns about allergies and genetic engineering associated with soy help to pave the way for pea protein. Ripple uses natural flavors, sugars, and salt to achieve its flavor profile, as is common in plant-based beverages. Functional ingredients include dipotassium phosphate as buffer, lecithin to keep the oil from separating out, and a blend of gums for the right texture and mouthfeel and for ingredient suspension. Healthy vitamins and minerals have also been added, as well as sunflower oil, which helps impart a slightly creamy, fatty character to traditional milk. Here is an example of a popular line of plant-based creamers called nut pods. You'll notice the calories and nutrients are very low. This is typical for creamers since the serving size is so small. Note that in the US, calories and nutrients are calculated based on serving size, but in other countries, they may also be calculated based on 100 mils or 100 grams. You can see from the ingredients list that the second ingredient after water is fat. This is an important feature for its application as a creamer. Now let's take a look at the functionality of each of these ingredients. Coconut cream is the fat that's used in nut pods. Coconut cream is known for its high level of saturated fat, which helps give it a mouthfeel very close to the butterfat in traditional cream. Coconut cream also gives a pleasant flavor. Almonds and salt also contribute to the taste of nut pods. The functional ingredients include dipotassium phosphate as buffer, gums for texture, mouthfeel, and suspension, and lecithin, which is an emulsifier that keeps the fat from separating out. Let's move to yogurt now. On the screen, you will see the nutrition and ingredient information for a plant-based yogurt made by Kite Hill, which is a company based out of the United States. There is little less protein in this yogurt than in traditional yogurt, but the fiber is higher at 2 grams, whereas traditional yogurt has no fiber. Kite Hill yogurt is also cholesterol-free, which is another health benefit compared to traditional yogurt. Kite Hill does have less calcium than traditional yogurt, but there are many plant-based yogurt companies that choose to fortify their products with calcium to levels similar to traditional yogurt. Let's now take a closer look at the ingredients. Both the protein and fat found in Kite Hill yogurt come from almonds. Almonds also contribute to the product's flavor, as does sugar and the acidity produced by the cultures. Functional ingredients include a blend of 3 different gums to achieve the right thickness and creamy mouthfeel and to provide stability against syneresis, which is water separation. The water binding ability of gums allows gums to perform all of these different functions. Live active cultures are the bacterial cultures that were added to the almond milk to ferment it into yogurt. Next, we'll take a look at a popular plant-based cheese brand Dea, which is based out of Canada. Dea is known for its good melting properties, which are important in applications like pizza. Some nutritional benefits are that the calories and fat in Dea cheddar-style shreds are lower than the traditional cheddar cheese shreds. However, the protein and calcium are also lower compared to traditional cheddar cheese shreds. This is a good example of how each plant-based dairy company must prioritize the most important features of their products. For Dea, the sensory qualities, including the taste, color, texture, and mouthfeel of the product, and the physical property of melting are the most important goals. This has proved to be a successful strategy for Dea. Let's examine the ingredients that are used to meet these goals. Together, the protein, carbohydrate, and fat ingredients make up the base of Dea cheese. Since Dea is committed to making allergen-free products, pea protein is used as the protein source versus soy, and tapioca flour is the flour used versus wheat flour. The blend of fats with different fatty acid profiles and their specific proportions are key to achieving the good melting properties that Dea cheese is known for. To match the flavor of cheese, this product uses salt and natural flavors, as well as yeast for a savory umami taste and citric acid to mimic the lactic acid tartness of traditional cheese. For functional ingredients, glycerine and xanthan gum help to create the right texture and also help stabilize the product. The colorings used are annatto to impart a yellow color, titanium dioxide, which can be used to lighten the overall color and improve the opacity. An emerging, novel approach to formulating alternative dairy products is the use of cellular agriculture. In cellular agriculture, traditional dairy proteins such as whey and casein can be produced through a microbial fermentation process. The DNA that encodes for the specific animal protein, like whey protein, is introduced into the microorganisms such as yeast, bacteria, or fungi, which are then allowed to grow and undergo fermentation. The proteins they produce can then be isolated and purified. Although these products are produced using genetically modified organisms, that is, the microbes that carry out the fermentation, the final products themselves do not contain GMOs because the microbes are removed from the final proteins. Perfect Day is a company based in the United States using this approach. Because they are combining proteins made from cellular agriculture with plant-based fats, carbohydrates, and other ingredients, the resulting dairy products are actually hybrid products rather than fully plant-based. In the plant-based meat category, the Impossible Burger is also using this approach by adding fermentation-derived leg hemoglobin to plant-based ingredients to give the product a more meaty flavor and color. Now let's shift the track a little and talk about the regulations around plant-based milk. Two geographies we'll talk about in this presentation are the United States and Europe. Let's start off with the United States. As we saw earlier, conventional milk has a standard of identity in the US and in many other countries. Standards of identity are basically definitions for foods explaining what they must or must not contain. Part of that definition stipulates that it must come from cows. This can present a problem for plant-based milk companies during labeling if they can't include the word milk or other legally defined dairy terms on their labels. In the US, what was happening was that there were a number of plant-based milks on the markets with labels that included the word milk, such as soy milk, almond milk, etc., but the FDA was not taking any enforcement action to prohibit this. But not long ago, the dairy industry addressed the issue, calling for the government to take action. Since then, there has been a lot of legal back and forth on this issue at both federal and state levels. While things can change quickly in this arena, the status as of July 2020 was that the United States federal regulations are allowing the term milk and other dairy terms to be used by plant-based dairy products. In light of this, some states, often states with a strong conventional dairy industry, have worked to pass laws preventing the term milk from being used on plant-based products in those states on the grounds that they are misleading labels and the federal government prohibits such type of labels. But given plant-based milk labels do not constitute misleading labels as explained in the later slides, we can expect pushback from individual plant-based dairy companies to get milk and dairy terms back on the product labels. It's also important to note that most of these laws are not yet in effect. For plant-based dairy entrepreneurs and investors, it is important to have a good understanding of labeling regulations that can impact plant-based dairy product labeling, including regulations for countries, states, provinces, and trade areas. Even though dairy standards of identity exist, plant-based dairy can use dairy terms on their labels because they are appropriately qualified. For example, soy milk. The Good Food Institute filed a petition with the US FDA in 2017 to make the case that FDA should clarify that new foods can be named in a way that references traditional foods in a manner that's clear to consumers. Since today's consumers are not likely to think that a product with almond milk or coconut milk on the label contains cow's milk, banning conventional dairy terms for plant-based dairy labels is not needed to prevent misleading consumers. In fact, now that almond milk and coconut milk are so widespread, changing to almond beverage and coconut beverage would likely confuse consumers about what those products actually are. Also, there is a precedent for allowing manufacturers to use a modified version of the legal term. For example, gluten-free bread is permitted, although it doesn't conform to the legal definition of bread. Europe is a far more complicated regulatory landscape for plant-based dairy companies due to the combination of EU regulations and the regulations of many individual countries, each with their own requirements on the use of traditional milk and dairy terms. For example, while the terms milk, butter, and cheese cannot be used on plant-based dairy products in the EU, according to the European Court of Justice, there are 130 exceptions to this rule spread over 15 European languages, and historical usage of terms in regional languages. On this slide, we have included some resources that can be used to understand these regulations in more detail. We will also be sharing these resources separately along with the webinar. Okay. Finally, we will explore the number of white space opportunities in the plant-based dairy products across different geographies. In the United States, white space opportunities include developing a Greek-style high-protein plant-based yogurt. The current plant-based yogurts in the market have a texture similar to traditional yogurt, but now the thicker texture of Greek yogurt has also become very popular. 2. Developing plant-based cheese that melts and stretches like traditional cheese, especially for use on pizza. 3. Improving the taste of plant-based sour cream and cream cheese. And 4. Developing functional plant-based milk that is a perfect match to traditional milk in taste and function. In Brazil, cashew milk costs up to 4 times more than dairy milk, and plant-based mozzarella costs more than 4 times more too. So bringing down the cost of plant-based milks and cheese is a big opportunity. 2. Developing plant-based milk and other plant-based dairy products that have a neutral flavor rather than imparting the flavor of the plant so that it can be used in cooking as well as improving the product's functionality for use in cooking, such as to thicken sauces. Another opportunity in Brazil, as in the United States, is developing a plant-based cheese with good melting properties. The current plant-based cheese in the Brazilian market are not able to hold a pizza topping in place, which is especially important during pizza delivery, so it can't be used for that purpose. In India, India can use its vast agricultural diversity to develop functional plant proteins that can be used to develop plant-based dairy products. India could also serve as a manufacturing hub for plant-based dairy products. In China, improving the functionality of plant-based milks, example plant-based milks which have reduced separation, improved foaming, improved thickening when heated is a white space opportunity. Right now, plant-based milks made from soy and nut are used for drinking, but have off flavors if you try to cook with them. So developing appropriate flavor-neutral plant-based milks to serve different functionalities is a white space opportunity. In China, cheese is becoming more popular now, so this is a good time to develop plant-based cheeses and get ahead of the trend. In Israel, bringing down the cost of plant-based milks is a big opportunity, as well as increasing the protein content of plant-based cheese to match the nutrition of traditional cheese and to make it organoleptically similar. Another opportunity is in developing plant-based butter, as there is a gap in the market here. 3. Streamlining regulations on importing and labeling plant-based dairy products is another big white space opportunity too. So there is a lot to do across many geographies, and you can be any stakeholder. You can be an entrepreneur, researcher, investor, and still get involved in this segment. To successfully address a white space opportunity in plant-based dairy, here is a list of potential talent needs. If you are a company looking to develop plant-based dairy products, these are the people that you might need to hire. If you are a student or researcher looking to work in the plant-based dairy industry, on the screen are the domains you would want to study, specialize, or research in. Plant genetics. This works upstream of the value chain in developing crops with optimal nutrition content, functionality, etc., which can be used in plant-based dairy products. For example, can pea or oat be grown such that they have high emulsification potential or have all the 9 essential amino acids? 2. Biochemistry. This domain also works upstream in determining specific processes to extract and analyze proteins from plants and to functionalize proteins. All of this information can be used when formulating plant-based dairy products. Which brings me to food science. Food scientists are trained to understand the chemistry, biology, and engineering of food and formulate the product from an ingredient and processing standpoint to match the desired requirements of texture, flavor, and shelf life. Dairy scientists, who are highly specialized food scientists focused on dairy, can be especially valuable here due to their specific areas of knowledge around conventional milk and dairy products. Another skill set crucial to launching products in this domain is engineering. Typically, chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, industrial engineers are hired so that they can apply their skill set in scaling up of products from lab scale to pilot scale to finally commercial scale. Here is a slide showing the typical equipment needs for researching, developing, and optimizing plant-based dairy products. This list is designed just to give you an idea of what might be needed for plant-based dairy company, but it can vary depending upon your product requirements. This list is also something for equipment manufacturers to keep in mind, as supplying this type of equipment to a new plant-based dairy company represents a growing opportunity. If you're developing just the final product, then the equipment that you will need is on the right side of the screen and includes a high shear mixer, pH and ionic strength tester, homogenizer, a heat exchanger for trialing pasteurization conditions, etc. You might need equipment to help define your process limits or to determine your final product specifications. For example, a texture profile analyzer, rheometer, viscometer, and moisture analyzer. If your product also involves a protein extraction step, then you might need equipment used to extract proteins too, like milling equipment, a centrifuge, a filtration unit, a spray dryer, etc. And then analyzing the proteins, like a calorimeter, protein content analyzer, etc. So there is a lot to do in the field of plant-based dairy, and as mentioned earlier, you can be any type of stakeholder and get involved. If you are a food and beverage manufacturer, consider adding plant-based dairy products to your portfolio or expanding and improving existing offerings focusing on flavor and new plant proteins. Potential entrepreneurs, evaluate your interest and fit in this high-growth area of plant-based dairy products. Investors, assess market gaps in plant-based dairy to identify high-growth opportunities. Ingredient and equipment suppliers, reach out to plant-based dairy companies to better understand their needs. Growers, reach out to ingredient suppliers to learn about the evolving needs for plant-based ingredients. Researchers, focus research efforts on improving ingredient functionality, formulation, or stability of plant-based dairy products. Students, consider studying food science, biochemistry, or engineering and interning or working for a plant-based dairy company. Consumers, buy plant-based dairy products and please request them if they are not available. That brings us to the end of the presentation today. I hope you have learned a lot of new and useful information about the exciting area of plant-based dairy and how you might get involved. If you have any questions regarding the plant-based dairy on the technical side or business side, please feel free to reach out to us at the Good Food Institute using the emails on this slide. Also, you will find the references used in this presentation on the following slides. So please refer to any of them for more details on a particular aspect of plant-based dairy. From all of us here at the Good Food Institute, thank you for joining us in this review of plant-based dairy.